Women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 20% of its leadership. On Her Story, we'll explore the careers of bold and influential women from Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill and learn how they've overcome the odds. I'm your host, Sangela Jane, and this is Her Story, a program where we explore what's beyond the glass ceiling. I'm thrilled to welcome Esther Farkas, Senior Vice President of Corporate Development and Chief Legal Officer of Unite Us, which is a technology company that brings together care networks of social and healthcare services. Esther, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So, what's interesting is as we think about healthcare as being one of the most highly regulated industries, your background as a lawyer is particularly relevant. Why don't we start a little bit about, what you do at Unite Us, particularly in your role, and where are you spending your time these days?
I have sort of a dual role here. I came in as a lawyer. I'm Chief Legal Officer, so I oversee all of legal and compliance. And then, I have a background in transactional law, so I'm sort of, a very business-minded lawyer. And, one of the things I've been doing for the last year or so is also overseeing corporate strategy. And so it's a nice intersection of my skill set here, and I'm able to kind of make an impact across the organization in a couple different areas. So it's a great fit for, both my skill set and my personality.
Unite Us recently raised a big Series A, about $150 million. Congratulations to you and the team. I know you played a big role and have played a big role in thinking about Unite Us's growth journey and the fundraising efforts. Tell us a little bit about that process.
I've actually been here for all of Unite Us's rounds from the Series C onto the Series C now. And it's always sort of, is this the right time? Do we really need to raise? How much do we raise? Is this part of where, if we raise now, what are we going to use it for? How are we going to grow? And so, starting about last fall, we got kind of into the mindset of, okay, if we had, more money, what would we do? And how would we accelerate what we're already doing? And honestly, get our technology more places to help more people across the country. So I worked with the two founders to put together, a pretty aggressive growth plan for how we could expand our geographical reach and bring our technology more places. And then I think we came to a realization that, okay, if we're going to do this, yeah, we could use sort of what we have on our balance sheet. It wasn't necessarily, we're not, running out of money. We didn't need to raise, but we got to a point where we really saw the potential of what this company could become if we had, if we had these funds at our disposal to hire people, to put it towards, sales and marketing, to put it towards, just hiring local people across the country and to grow our existing product line. So that's sort of how we came to it. And then, I think there's been, because we're a fairly, mature startup, I'd say, we started in 2013, we've had a couple investors following us along our journey. So, there were people that knew the company, believed in what we were doing, understood the mission. And that was that was a big piece of it for us. We really wanted to bring people in that align with our mission to help people and to use our technology to provide services to vulnerable populations. And, I think ultimately all these venture funds, yes, they look at returns, but do they believe in what we're doing? And do they believe that what we're doing is the right way to get services to people? So we really tried to look for investors that aligned with that. And, our lead investor, Iconic, is a mission-driven fund. And we really felt like they aligned with our, values and could really help us grow, could use their resources. They have vast resources to help us grow the way we want to grow, which is to continue to make an impact with our mission.
For those who may be a little less familiar with Unite Us, in many ways, you are a health technology company, but almost broader than that too, because you're really working with governments and kind of thinking about the ownership of healthcare as kind of a collective responsibility. Just tell us a little bit about kind of what Unite Us actually does and how you work with not only kind of healthcare partners, but those beyond the traditional domain of healthcare.
What we say is we're a technology company that connects healthcare with social care. And so that's a lot of big words just to say that we are a technology company that helps people get services they need. So, a classic, just real world example is if you're at a hospital and you're being discharged and you don't have a place to sleep. Right now, without our technology, maybe you're given, an address of a shelter nearby or in your neighborhood or, one that you visited before, or maybe you're given a card or a leaflet. Our technology makes it possible to electronically send a referral to a homeless shelter and to have that shelter then record the outcome, whether that person showed up, got the help they needed, and then perhaps referred on to an employment agency, perhaps referred on to a food bank, all through our platform, and tracking how this person got the help they needed, and helping their care coordinators, who are social workers at the hospital or care coordinators at these community-based organizations, make sure that they're getting the help they need, which isn't just one thing, but a wraparound services that they need to get back on their feet. So it helps both, the community-based organizations and these healthcare providers get people care and track the care they're getting to make sure that they're getting the services they need.
Like you mentioned, you've been at Unitas basically from the beginning and have seen that evolution of the company. Let's kind of backtrack for a second now and kind of leading up to Unitas. So how did it all start? I know your family is from Hungary and you spent early part of your childhood there. How did that, coming from an immigrant family and the move to the United States, kind of influence your career aspirations from day one?
And I think that's a huge influence in who I am and where I've gone with my career. And we moved here when I was 9. Hungary was still communist. It was like very much sort of a very, very different place. My little 3rd grade friends had a lot of questions for me on what communism was like, and it seemed like a different world at the time, which is sort of hard to imagine now because Hungary, I think people think of as part of Europe. But anyway, so I was very much sort of an outsider, and then I knew that if I worked hard, studied hard, I would be able to, perhaps do things that I wouldn't be able to do in Hungary here. And that's sort of, that's a classic immigrant talk track. And that comes, my parents sacrificed a lot to come here. They gave up their friends, their careers, both doctors. They had to start all over. And so there was like, just to say it, like a little bit of weight on my shoulders to make sure that I did what I could do with myself here. So I think that's a big part of who I am. And, I'd always also, having come from essentially I say nothing. My parents were doctors, they're intellectuals. But when we moved here, we did have, almost nothing to our name. And we moved to a fairly affluent community outside Detroit so that I could go to a very good public school. Because if there's anything my parents had heard, it was that if you move to the right place, you can go to the right school. So we moved kind of to the edge of this community. And, Detroit was at the time in the 80s, is very segregated neighborhoods, and so I saw that growing up. That really formed, I think, how I think about health equity, how I think about our impact on health equity here. That's always been something that I've been interested in, and I think so I think that combination of knowing that I had to probably work very hard, and then seeing what it's like to have nothing and to need sort of help from your neighbors, from people around you, I think, all contributed to why, I, ultimately join and really believe in this organization and what we're trying to do with technologies.
You mentioned both of your parents were physicians. At that early age, did you aspire to also be a physician? Was there family pressure to kind of follow that path? How did you think through that as you were kind of preparing to go to college and figure out what to major in at Duke?
As any immigrant family, you have to make sure that you pick a career where you can make money. And so as long as you're a doctor or another profession where it's very clear what your path to making money is, you're all good. So definitely that was hammered into me. You're not going to become a writer or something where you can't make money, because you need to make sure that you have a career. So being the child of 2 doctors, I'd always been interested in math and science. So it just seemed like the natural path for me to become a doctor. And 2, I did always have this, I don't know what to call it, this feeling inside me that I wanted to help people somehow. So whether that's in my day-to-day as a doctor or as I came to realize kind of later in life, you can help people, perhaps not so directly, but indirectly by making impact in their lives. I knew that had to be part of my career. I was on a path to become a doctor. I went to Duke. I went through the whole pre-med program. And then my dad got very ill my junior year, and I just, that sort of made me see the world differently and made me question what I was doing, like it does to a lot of people, and then you have sort of a family crisis or any kind of health crisis like that. I think it made me sort of think more deeply about what I wanted. Is this how I want to spend my life? Do I want to be in a hospital setting day in and day out? Do I really love this? And at the time I was also shadowing a doctor at Duke who was, treating very, very sick patients. And it's very hard, just emotionally very hard. I think he had become perhaps a little bit detached. I saw that process happening. And So it made me question whether this was the right path for me, and I started thinking about how else I could make an impact. Were there other careers where I could still make money like my parents wanted, make sure that I was independent, and like just to, like, this isn't, you know, this desire by immigrants and this like teaching their kids about making sure that they pick a career where they make money. It comes from a desire for them to be independent, you know? So like the whole concept of financial independence and knowing, you know, what it's like not to have money because you've come here with nothing. I think it's not greed, right? It's very much about independence. And that's how I've always thought about having a career and, you know, earning a living is could I be financially independent? Can I take care of my kids? You know, that type of stuff more than anything. So then I chose to go to law school, and I, you know, at the time thought that I wanted to spend a lot of time doing international human rights law, which again, I think kind of played into this idea I had where I really wanted to make sure that whatever I did, I was somehow making an impact and helping people. And so I did that for a little bit, and I joined a law firm to repay my law school debts, like a lot of people do right after college. And I found, much to my like full surprise, that I really enjoyed transactional law. So I had thought, you know, what I really like is writing and litigation. And when I got to actually doing it, I realized what I really like is negotiating and contracts and bringing people to a table and making sure that they're aligned and thinking about all the details of something they're trying to accomplish together. So that's sort of how I got into, and I liked less what I thought I would like, which is litigation, which it can be like adversarial at times. You know, there is a lot of writing there, but I saw that didn't fit with my personality as much. And so I got into mergers and acquisitions, and a lot of public mergers and acquisitions, which is probably the last thing I would ever have thought I would do.
We kind of bonded over that earlier, right? I mean, it's such a common, I'll kind of go back to the immigrant story, right? We were all brought up with this idea, mostly out of, you know, the intent of our parents thinking we don't want you to struggle as much as we did, so kind of play the safe path. But also it's because they didn't know what else was out there. And part of why we started the show was to kind of educate, you know, kind of our broader communities that there are so many different paths and career options out there that it's not always that linear that, you know, you have to go to law school or, you know, med school or, you know, kind of the traditional path, so to speak. But kind of your journey kind of explains you kind of have to try a bunch of things to really figure out what you actually love to do and where your strengths are. And so I think it's really a nice evolution to see. Kind of going back to healthcare, your expertise is something that we probably don't see a ton of in a lot of the ecosystem today, and it's highly needed. As you think about the way healthcare is becoming more regulated, I mean, the government is now the largest payer and regulator of health services. How do you, just from your vantage point, kind of think about where the industry is headed and how we should think about strategies in that kind of context of what it means to, you know, be a regulated industry? We operate in a highly regulated environment. And so, yes, we're a technology company, but we're a technology company that a lot of healthcare players use, payers, providers, and like you said, government. So, yeah, I mean, look, we see a lot of regulations moving towards, value-based care and making sure that social determinants of health, which is, what we, for lack of a better word, provide or specialize in through our technology, become a part of how a health plan considers whole person care. So if you think about, how to make people healthier and how to make sure that they don't end up back in an emergency room or hospitalized or being costly, sort of how can you help them get back on their feet, and how can you move some of the care into the community instead of the hospital setting? So, have sort of these shelters, these food banks, these mental behavioral health centers also be a part of the care team. And so, look, like even under a very recent example is there's a new HIPAA amendment proposed that would allow hospital or health plans, really any covered entity, to share information with a social care provider as if they were sharing with another healthcare provider under the, try to simplify it, like a care coordination function. So that's the Office of Civil Rights. Recognizing that it's necessary to share information with social care organizations because that's part of the care continuum. And so that's where we see, I think, a lot of regulations. I think there's a lot of sort of also Medicaid regulations coming down saying that any sort of managed care organization has to have a social determinants of health component to its
to its care plan. So I think there is both at a federal and state level very much a recognition that that people need more than just medical care to make them healthy.
Do you envision kind of, let's say, like the next decade of healthcare, we think about the leadership competencies and the skill sets that we'll kind of need as an industry to kind of grapple with these changes? Will it, do you think we'll see more those who trained in law entering into this field, or do you think that there are other routes or kind of certain skill sets that people need to be able to think through these types of partnerships and working with states and working with payers and kind of working with these different entities?
I think we need to start thinking about healthcare regulation, healthcare law in like a broader sense. It's not just about being a narrow expert in regulatory law. It's not just about understanding HIPAA. It's about understanding the whole continuum of care that might apply to a person, including like if they're getting care at the community level, if they're getting care, at home, if they're getting care through telehealth or some kind of virtual session, right? So it's not just about like I show up at a hospital anymore. There's now like sort of dozens of different ways people can get care, like in their homes, in their communities, and regulation will have to follow that, in a way that I think will be interesting to see. So I think it's very, very much centered around like, let's regulate a health plan, let's regulate a provider where people show up in person. But, I think we're moving towards a more inclusive care model.
Kind of going back then to your journey as you've kind of worked your way to kind of building that comprehensive view of the landscape. So after graduating from University of Michigan for law school, you mentioned you went to kind of the traditional big law environment, and you probably know these numbers better than I do, but I think the latest McKinsey stats kind of say what is about 47% of law associates are women, but then it's only about 20% that end up being kind of equity partners. And I have talked a lot about how that's a tough environment for a lot of women to be in. Tell us a little bit about kind of your experience in those early years, practicing in that kind of environment. What was it like? What did you kind of have to face that being in that minority group?
And I think that's right, and you can see that's sort of a time in any young woman's life where you are thinking about do I want a family? Do I want to settle down? That's sort of like when you're at law school, you're in your mid to late 20s. You start at this law firm. You're in your late 20s to mid 30s, right? You probably make partner in your mid to late 30s. And for women, that time, I think, is the time when you're thinking, do I want to have children? Is this going to be something I can do together with this, very high pressure career? So I think that's, why you lose a lot of women. And that's why they don't end up pursuing those leadership roles inside a law firm, because it is very grueling. And there is sort of this 7-8 year period where that has to be sort of your focus in life. And I think a lot of people are not prepared to say that they're going to necessarily, not start a family at that time or focus on other things. So, I mean, my experience, I think, is maybe even... it was maybe even slightly tougher because I chose something inside a law firm that is very male dominated. Mergers and acquisitions and public mergers and acquisitions is sort of this like very, for whatever reason, male dominated area. And so, at the time I came in, there were no female partners, and the partners were supportive for sure, but there are just some connections you can't make with male partners that you can with female partners, and there's just some things that you're never going to be able to learn from them. And I think one of those things is like what's my negotiation style? So if I look at men, I think they do negotiate differently than women, and I don't know that I ever found a male partner that I could look to and think, okay, I really like the way he negotiates. It fits with my personality. I'm going to learn how to do this. Whereas I think if I had some female examples, I think I probably would have been able to do that better. And I had other sort of female mentors in other groups within the firm, and that was very, very helpful. But I could feel the burden on them as well, as being some of the only women that were out there, and having to like mentor all of the incoming women. Because as you say, like there's a lot of incoming women and then very few at the partner level. So I could sense that they felt this burden as well. And, also like that's just one woman. It might not be that my negotiating style lines up with her. It would have been nice to have like 5 or 10 or 15 to look to. So I think there was that. I became pregnant, I think my 5th or 6th year. I didn't feel like I could tell really anybody because, again, like, you have to sit across a male partner and tell them about it's something that I think is fairly personal. But I had to keep obviously working the hours and often like all night, so I'll be like 4 or 5 in the morning still working. And it's you're not feeling great. I mean, everyone handles their pregnancy differently, but I didn't feel great. I didn't perform great, and like I think they sort of understood that maybe on like sort of an esoteric level, but like, do they really understand like how just
practicalities?
Yeah, like months on and on, you don't feel great. And what I think now looking back, and I think what I wish they had said to me was like, this is just sort of a blip in your life. Like, this is just 9 months, or this is just 2 years. You have a 30-year career ahead of you where you're going to keep performing. Take these like 9 months or however long where you're not feeling great and just like still do what you need to do. But maybe you don't need to be at like of the highest performing level and working all night every night because your body's doing something else, right? So I think that's sort of what I try, both to like people both to men and women that I manage, just make sure that they understand that when they have a baby, when they're getting married, it's just one blip in their life that is very important and they should focus on in a very long career. So like if you're having a baby and you want to be home and your wife gave birth in May, be home for like 3-4 months, whatever you need to be, because you really only have a baby once, twice, maybe in my case 3 times in your life, but you're looking down a 20-25 year career. That one piece of your life shouldn't bring you completely off track, and it shouldn't sort of reinvent the way you think about yourself as like, maybe not the highest performer. And I think that's what happens to women is like, well, maybe I'm not, maybe I can't do this because I can't do it right now.
That long view is really important because you're right. We tend to focus on the here and now, but how do you think about it in the context of the longer progression?
I couldn't continue to work the hours that I needed to, I think, to succeed. And I could see that, I could see that I had 2 kids at that time. They were little and I would just like never see them, I knew that. And so I was like, I have to think about something else to do now. And that still makes sense for me, but I'm not going to be able to see them at home. And also I didn't feel like I could perform at work. So in my 7th year, which is pretty common, right before, I would have really had to get into like a year or 2 of very, very tough work. I left and I thought for a while about what I wanted to do and how I could keep doing something I was interested in, but without having to sacrifice what I thought was an important time in my kids' lives, when they're very small. And so I ended up getting connected to another former associate at the law firm we were at who was great, and he was thinking the same way, and we realized we were both very interested in startups and helping entrepreneurs and helping small businesses and using kind of these skill sets we got from working at a big law firm he was there for 7 years as well, and giving that benefit to small entrepreneurs who don't always have have access to that type of expertise because it's expensive, So we started our own law firm and we focused on startups. And that's where, in 2013, I met Dan, one of the founders here. And he was one of my first clients. And he believed in me. He believed that I could, help his company. And, I want to say that I really believed his mission. I liked him. Honestly, I was just trying to get clients at that time. And then over the next 7 years, before I joined full time and at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I really got to know Dan. I got to know the company and its mission and, really, really saw that it was a great fit for me.
Let's go back first to the fact, just to make sure we appreciate this. So you kind of hit the tipping point in the traditional, law arena where you said, okay, I need to do something different that accommodates the lifestyle that you want for yourself. But whereas a lot of women maybe either, take time off from work or take a maybe less intense job, you kind of ran your own firm. So I guess it's all relative, but I just want to say that, that in itself, running your own business, building it from ground up is also no easy undertaking. So tell us just a little bit about kind of that process. What was that shift like from being in more of a, what I'll call corporate setting where the paths were kind of defined for you to now having to, I presume, branch out to new skill sets, like you mentioned, client acquisition, what were you thinking at that point in time?
I loved it. I think I've always been a little bit entrepreneurial. And I really liked thinking about more than just the business of providing legal advice. So like you said, like where are we going to have offices? What's our logo going to look like? What's our website going to look like? How do I, like business development, which at a big law firm, you do no business development at all because these firms and the one I was at have been around for 100 years. And so the clients come to them and there's very little in the way of like get to know us and use us. So I loved all that. I really, I think, found my style when I was working for myself because I could really see real time what people needed and wanted from me. And some of it was legal advice. A lot of it was just like business advice, you know, because they're like, you've seen other companies like mine. What do I do next? Like, how do I get this transaction done by like putting a structure in place that makes sense for both sides? What is the other side thinking? What should I be? You know, so like, I think I really found where I could really help people with my skill set better than I had at the firm where I was like swimming in very narrow lanes. You know, you're providing like very complex advice on very complex transactions based on like the most complex regulatory laws. So like SEC regulations, looking at Delaware law, that was like, you know, yes, I can interpret something and advise you on this one thing. This was like, I need help with everything. Can you help me do this, this, and this? And then when they saw that like I could, then they'd ask for more advice along those lines. I think that's sort of like when I think about how I got into corporate strategy here, I think that's probably the genesis of it, is just thinking about like the bigger business picture for these entrepreneurs, you know, for 7 years.
I think what is so powerful about that story is, you know, it sounded like you created the own opportunity for yourself, right? You couldn't really find the outlet that would give you that opportunity to do all the things that, you know, you really thrived in and were kind of viewing the world. And you said, okay, well, I'm just going to create it and build it. And I think that not a lot of people can do that. And it really does take this entrepreneurial drive. So that's really great. If you now fast forward to your work at Unitas, I mean, I think what's important to highlight is you're really forging these partnerships. And as we talk a lot about, healthcare as an industry is very siloed. And so you are bringing all these different stakeholders together. And tell us a little about like what the process is like for you. What are some of the challenges that you face when you're bringing all these different stakeholders that historically have not really worked well together and getting them to forge these one-of-a-kind partnerships that have never historically existed?
That is a challenge that we face, and you have health plans that are competitors in a market, and we say to them, look, like, you guys are all plugging into the same network to provide ultimately services for all of your members. So, you know, you can help us build out this geography and this network, and then, you know, your 3 next competitors in the state were also going to plug into this very network. So I think it's about, we do think of our customers as partners, and I know that may like sound trite sometimes, but I hope they think of us more than as vendors, but really as sort of as working together to build this social determinants of health space that didn't exist, you know, 5-10 years ago. And as we do it together, we listen to their feedback. They listen to sort of our experience working across the country. So if they're regional, you know, they're based in like California, Nebraska, and so they understand their region. We have obviously national experience that we can bring to the table that helps them think through some of the challenges. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a challenge. I think they understand that working together in this area will get more people the help they need. So I think there is some of that in there. So obviously they're competitive, but I think they're also ultimately, they are trying to help their members, you know, be healthier. And I think they see that working together it will yield more results to do that. So, and their memberships are constantly changing and evolving. So, you know, I think we did certainly we started the conversation being asked to build siloed networks, for sure, like you said. And I think we've moved past that, and I think hopefully we're at a point now, I think we are, it's been like 2-3 years since we've been having those conversations where we can, I think people are comfortable with this model now where they do all work together in these areas. And perhaps they have communities where they're stronger and they have community partners that they prefer, and we bring those onto the network for them. But like ultimately everybody can refer to those community partners, and it makes the whole network stronger. So, you know, and then we have one platform across the country, one instance. So like any feature that any one of them suggests to us, and we take all their suggestions super seriously, we build into the platform and we roll it out across the country. So there's no single feature that any one payer or provider has that others don't. But they've been, I think to their credit, they've been great, and I think they understand the mission, and I think they see the impact of having these measurable outcomes, and I do think that, ultimately, I think we're all aligned that we want to help people get services.
There are so many great lessons in that for a lot of other organizations that are trying to kind of all come to the table in that. I want to shift a little bit now to kind of your personal leadership trajectory kind of within each of these milestones. So from the early days of law school to actually, working in the big law firm, to creating your own, to now being in a startup environment. It sounds to me it's pretty evident that you've always been focused on just doing what you love, creating value, and just kind of helping others. But at what point did you really start kind of viewing yourself as a leader? And so, one of the questions that we like to ask all of our guests on the show is, as you think about your foray into leadership, formal or informal, do you consider yourself to be an accidental or intentional leader?
For sure, accidental. I think, I'm a classic introvert. I think I'm much more comfortable, one-on-one than I am in front of big groups. And I'm certainly much more comfortable at home with a book than I am out at a networking event. But I think it was probably when I was at the law firm, I was probably my third, fourth year in, and I was managing. The management structure at a law firm is very fixed, and so who you're managing at each level, and what guidance you're supposed to be providing for them, and there's no management training, so it's very much about what you take away from it and what you feel like giving out. And I was managing an associate at that time, and he was very junior, and I think he's very unsure of himself and his skill set, and we had several conversations where I hope that I helped him see where he could get from here to there, and I started thinking of myself as someone who could help people that they manage be successful, and that's sort of, I think, how I still continue to view my leadership style is, how do I help the people that I manage build a career and be successful in what they do and use their skill sets to their maximum potential, and I think that for me, that's what being a leader is, more than giving a speech in front of a crowd, or getting out there and being super inspirational with my oratory skills. So I think that's where I ended up. I think that's where I'm most comfortable and hopefully most impactful here and other places I've been.
You mentioned earlier that you didn't have many female kind of role models or kind of examples of those leaders to kind of look to kind of understand those styles. I know one of the things that you and I both have in common is we have these really strong mothers who, were working women and have built amazing careers and really kind of shaped for us the expectations of, being in the workplace as a female. And so as you think about kind of your leadership trajectory, how is kind of from the early days to what you were kind of told on kind of how to behave or how to act, perhaps, to kind of now as you see the landscape, how has kind of that shaped your thinking to what it means to be a female leader?
My mom is an amazing person. She's a cardiologist. She was one of the first female cardiologists. I think she, for a while now, she practices in North Dakota. She's the only female cardiologist in the state. She was also always there for us as kids, and she enjoyed cooking. She made us dinner. And so these are not things you have to do if you have a career, but I think she did a really good job of balancing her career, which is very high pressure and high stress, obviously, with being the person that we needed at home, and so I think about that a lot and how I can do that. And, I talked about this last time too, but I think also about how you can stay being yourself and being sort of, not having to emulate necessarily men in leadership positions by dressing or acting or talking like them, but being a woman in a leadership position and being comfortable, being comfortable dressing the way you want to and not necessarily in business suits, which are very much, I think, made for men's bodies. That's a different conversation, but the dressing and being perhaps dressing more in a more feminine way, or however you're comfortable, honestly, and not having this ideal of a leader that looks like this, which is a man, because most of the leaders in the country look like that, and they are men. So do I have to look like that, or can I take a different path and be a different person and be someone who dresses, speaks differently, has a different leadership style, negotiates differently, brings different things to the table, but is still a leader, but maybe not the traditional definition of a male leader, and I think my mom's been a huge part of like the path she's forged in cardiology and how she's been able to do that. And, one of the things that she's does very well, and she's loved by her patients. She's an expert, but her patients love her, and they feel cared for by her. And I'm not saying men can't do that, but I think that's unique to her. And I think it's maybe not something that all doctors at her level think about as being important anymore. So, and that's just the path she's forged, and I think that's her whole personality, and not just whatever she was supposed to focus on as a doctor practicing in this traditional male field.
As you and I have talked about, right, it's like we kind of start in this path kind of being a little bit more guarded and kind of acting the way that we think we're supposed to act, right? So the parallel I have, right, it was like, my mom would say, well, maybe you should, keep your hair shorter in the workplace, right? Because that's just that's more professional, right? But then you kind of dig into that, and that's probably what it was like for her generation. And so now we can kind of define our own styles, and it's really about what value you bring, like the analogy to your mom and her patients. And so, I know you spent a lot of time internally at Unitas leading, what do you call them, like lean in circles, and really trying to help kind of change those expectations and bring other women and kind of promote diversity internally. Talk a little bit about kind of how you're tackling that for the company today, and how are you kind of redefining some of those expectations or that a lot of us kind of have going into it.
As a company, we're obviously we're very focused on diversity, and we have been since the beginning. So one of the things obviously is gender diversity. I think I try and, again, be an example to other women leaders to say, as you said, you can be your own person, and there is no one type of leader, and that one type of leader necessarily has to be, this example of whatever. You can be a leader with your own style, and you don't always have to be. So, we had sort of a book review session on Lean In, which obviously classic now, everybody knows it, but what did it get right and wrong? And so we talked through that, and we talked about my path and how I always have worked very hard, but sometimes I felt like I had to define my own, what hard work meant to me, and not have it be defined by this law firm or this organization where I didn't have the flexibility to see my kids and to do what I needed to with my free time. So I think I try and I hope make people think critically about their role and their gender in their role. And I've talked to you about this too, but I see sort of the younger generations, I think, are even more flexible, I think, than our generation is in being themselves and leading and having their own style. And I love that. I love that they I think sort of wear what they're comfortable with. Yes, it's professional, but is it this stock uniform that you're supposed to wear as a leader? No. And they're still leaders, and they speak differently. They're sort of they kind of lean into their feelings a little bit more. And I think that's great. This idea that you have to be a wooden leader that doesn't always empathize because they're busy leading and doesn't have a personal life, doesn't have feelings. I hope that's on the way out, because I think you're just a much more effective leader if people see you as empathetic, as someone they can relate to, and someone who is genuine and a real person who has faults, but hopefully has strengths that can help you succeed, and also that is willing to learn from everybody. Not just, I hope, I do. I learn every day from people that I manage, and I encourage them to give me feedback, and I ask questions, because I think that's sort of, that's sort of another model of a leader too, is, make sure that you're teaching, but you're always learning too. So I know, there's a lot sort of that goes into, I think, and it's a long road. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not one session. It's not two. It's just constantly being there for people and constantly being available to guide and hopefully serving as an example.
Absolutely. To that example point, as you've mentioned, your family, and you have a couple of kids, and you're juggling all of that with demanding roles. What advice would you have for other, women and men who are trying to kind of juggle the personal and professional? How do you make it work for you and your family?
I think the greatest gift my mom gave me was that, I never feel guilty about having a career, So I know that I turned out okay, and she had a career, and so I I view it as like, I have 3 daughters, so I view it as like an example for my daughters on paths that they can take to be successful and outside the home or you know, like inside the home, like whatever. The point is, like, I had the choices I have. So they saw me when I was running my firm. I was at home. I worked from home all the time, and they saw me being happy and succeeding there and defining that. And then they now see me at sort of like a traditional office job, if you will, and like they come into my office and they look around, and I hope they're like proud of me, and I serve as an example to them. And so I think one thing is like never feel guilty about what you're doing, because yeah, maybe you're not at home for like every tiny, you know, thing that happens, but you're there for the big things. And like that sort of, you know, example is lifelong, of like a strong mother or father who takes their work seriously and has like a good work ethic and can also be there for you. So that's one. I think the other thing is I think this sort of last year and a half has like really taught us that you can work remotely pretty effectively. And I think it's a really nice way to balance family with work obligations. And so like for me, you know, we love traveling. So we take a lot of trips, even out west, internationally, whatever. Like I think that should be a part of everybody's life, whatever it is they do. Maybe it's not traveling, whatever they like to do with their free time, while also like, you know, working remotely. Like you don't have to sit around an office all day. You can sort of balance family time and like doing things with your family with remote work.
Well, your daughters are really lucky to have you as a role model there, because you know, the more that we see others do it, I think the more that, you know, it's going to shape what they do, and they're going to pass that on too. You know, to the personal habits piece, you know, I think the travel and all those outlets are really important. I think it's always interesting to hear kind of on a day-to-day level, like, do you have some kind of like a ritual or kind of something that you have to do that kind of sets you up for, you know, making the most of that day and feeling like, you know, you're optimally productive? What's kind of the thing that you do for you?
I get up early, I work out, but I take my daughters to school, and I love that. We carpool with some other kids, and it sounds like it's a chore, but it's not. Like it's like a 10-minute drive, and they're all sort of chattering in the car. They pick their own music, and it really makes me feel like I get my day started with like just little kids being happy and loud, and you know, just like makes me realize, right, like this is life, and like I'm gonna get into the office in like 10 minutes, and there's gonna be some difficult things I'm gonna have to work out, but like it's not everything, you know, like it gives you the perspective to be able to handle those difficult tasks and not like, you know, think that the world's crashing around you just because there's like 3 things you have to solve. And then at night, I always make sure that I get home to read with them. They all like, you know, come into our bed and they all read whatever books they're reading at the time. And it's just like a nice end to the day. And then usually I can't get back up and I fall asleep.
That's very sweet. Well, so I know we're hitting up against time, but I guess now just kind of rounding us out. So, you know, I know learning is a big theme in your life. And so as you kind of reflect on all your various experiences, is there something that you believed early on in your career, whether it's some kind of piece of advice that you were given or just something that you kind of believe that you kind of had to do that you no longer believe?
This sort of when I was coming up in the law firm environment, I think every advice you gave was like seen as having to be just essentially perfect, basically. Like if you don't, before you write an email, before you like, you know, ever advise a client, if you haven't done like 5 to 10 hours of work checking into it, then you haven't done it right. And I'd say it took me probably like almost a decade to unlearn that and to say like, you know, sometimes like you can just, you know, one, you can make mistakes and like you have to own the mistakes. But I think if you own those mistakes, people understand. And two, I do have, at some point, you have the experience and you have the knowledge to be able to advise without doing like, you know, hours and hours of work. And you should always do your research and you should always do work. But this idea that everything that you say and everything you write down has to be absolutely perfect and unimpeachable, I think just, you know, can paralyze people. And I think that kind of is the biggest thing. And I still like, obviously I do my best, and I really try and like not make huge mistakes, but I see that like not everything I say is unimpeachable, and like, yeah, like something I said might be wrong, and someone may come back to me and say, look, think about this differently, and then I'll learn from that and think about it differently, and I don't have to feel bad about not getting it completely right. So I think that particularly for women, I found it can be paralyzing. I think women have this like idea that they have to always be perfect at all times. And I think when you reinforce that with that kind of work environment, I think you can sort of people won't take risks. They won't innovate. They won't like go past their point of comfort, which is like what you really need, I think, to move the needle.
I'm sure someone has already coined this term, but I think the perfection paralysis, I mean, it's really something that we all deal with. And it's, I think it takes a fair amount of time to start realizing, okay, it doesn't have to always be that way. So, I guess final question then, I mean, as you think about the legacy that you'd like to leave behind, and I know that there's plenty more chapters of your book that you have to write, but what you want to be known for as a leader in our industry, what would be the title of your book or autobiography?
She tried really hard.
Love it.
I don't know. I mean, I think probably I've been very lucky. I mean, obviously I had like all the tools I needed. And I've had the support of my family and friends. And I was very fortunate to like grow up in an environment where I was given opportunity. And I don't know, probably, the introverted leader. I mean, obviously, because it is, I think it is tougher if you lean towards, and it's not impossible, obviously, but I think it's a different path. It's not necessarily, I think a lot of like traditional leaders are really extroverted. So I think it's a different path, but it's definitely, I think, achievable. And I'm still getting there. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get myself comfortable with things that make me uncomfortable just because of the way I am.
It's a lifelong process. And, like you started off saying, you really should, have to take a long view to all of this, because we're learning and growing every day. But I think that's really powerful. Esther, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I mean, your story is just really incredible. It is really a testament to, what it takes to kind of create opportunities and kind of forge the way ahead and kind of think intersectionally. And so really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.